Warren Buffett earned 99% of his $100 billion fortune after turning 50. But if you think that's impressive, meet the man who built a global empire at 65, starting with nothing but a $105 monthly Social Security check and 1,009 rejections. His name was Harland Sanders. In 1955, he was 65 years old, bankrupt, and watching bulldozers tear down the restaurant he'd spent 25 years building. The interstate highway system had just rerouted traffic 7 miles away from his business. Overnight, his life's work became worthless. 9 years later, he sold Kentucky Fried Chicken for $2 million. Today, KFC has over 30,000 locations in more than 140 countries. But here's what nobody tells you about Colonel Sanders' success story, and why everything you think you know about being too old is based on a cognitive bias that costs more wealth after 50 than market crashes ever will. Because Sanders didn't just build a business in his 60s. He built it by doing the one thing every expert said was impossible. The one thing society told him he was too old to attempt. The one thing that would require him to sleep in his car, face 1,000 rejections, and look foolish to everyone who knew him. So how does a 65-year-old man with no money and no business experience build one of the world's largest restaurant chains? And what does his story reveal about the single biggest mistake investors make after 50? In the next 16 minutes, we'll break down exactly what happened, and why the answer has nothing to do with fried chicken, and everything to do with a mental trap that Warren Buffett avoided while the rest of the world fell into it. To understand how Colonel Sanders built an empire at 65, we need to go back to when he was 40 years old, because that's when he discovered the recipe that would eventually make him famous. 15 years before his real success even began. Picture this. It's 1930. America is sliding into the Great Depression. Harland Sanders is a 40-year-old man with a history of failed ventures. Railroad worker, insurance salesman, steamboat operator. Nothing stuck. He wasn't building toward anything. He was surviving. That year, he took over a Shell gas station in Corbin, Kentucky. Small town, rural highway. And Sanders noticed something. Travelers passing through had nowhere to eat. So he started serving meals out of the station's dining room. Just home cooking. Nothing fancy. But people kept coming back for one dish. His fried chicken. By 1937, Sanders had expanded. 142-seat restaurant. Motel attached. And he was good at this. Really good. He perfected a pressure frying technique that cooked chicken faster without drying it out. He developed a blend of 11 herbs and spices. Kept the recipe secret. In 1939, Duncan Hines featured Sanders Court and Cafe in his guide, Adventures in Good Eating. That was the Michelin Guide of roadside America. Sanders became a regional destination. For the next 15 years, Sanders ran a successful small business. Not wealthy, but comfortable. Solid middle-class income. Respect in the community. He'd found his thing. At 65, most men in his position would be thinking about retirement. Maybe selling the restaurant to someone younger. Taking it easy. Sanders thought he'd built his life's work. He was wrong. What he'd actually built was just the prototype. A test kitchen for a business model he didn't even know existed yet. Because in 1955, everything changed. And I mean, everything. One government decision. 7 miles of road. And Sanders' entire world collapsed. The state of Kentucky announced the route for Interstate 75, new highway. Faster travel, economic progress. The route bypassed Corbin by 7 miles. 7 miles might not sound like much, but for a roadside restaurant that depended entirely on highway traffic, it was a death sentence. Sanders watched his customer count drop. Month after month, revenue collapsed. He tried to keep the business alive, but the math didn't work. Nobody was driving the old road anymore. At 65 years old, Harland Sanders was forced to auction his restaurant and motel just to pay his debts. The auction barely covered what he owed. He was left with almost nothing. A car, some cooking equipment, and $105 a month from Social Security. That was it. That was his retirement plan. Most men in that situation would have given up, accepted reality, found some part-time work to supplement Social Security, lived quietly, waited. Society certainly expected him to. Because here's what everyone knew in 1955. 65-year-old men don't start businesses. They wind down. They retire. They get out of the way for younger people with energy and time. But Sanders looked at his situation and made a different calculation. He had a recipe that people loved, 25 years of restaurant expertise. And according to life expectancy tables, maybe 10 or 15 years left. He could spend those years in poverty, or he could spend them trying something everybody would think was crazy. So he packed his pressure cooker and his secret recipe into his car, and he started driving. The plan was simple, desperate, but simple. Sanders would drive to restaurants across the South, walk in, offer to cook his fried chicken for the owner and staff. If they liked it, he'd teach them his method, his recipe, his pressure frying technique. In exchange, he wanted 5 cents for every chicken they sold using his system. Franchising wasn't a new concept in 1955, but a 65-year-old man trying to franchise a single recipe, sleeping in his car between pitches? That was unusual. The first restaurant owner said no. So did the second, and the third, and the 10th. Sanders kept driving. Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Virginia, cooking demonstrations in parking lots, sleeping in his Ford, living on almost nothing. The rejections came fast. We have our own recipes. This is too complicated. We're not interested. And the unspoken one Sanders heard in their eyes. You're too old for this. By most accounts, Sanders heard the word no over 1,000 times. Some say exactly 1,009 rejections. The exact number might be folklore, but the pattern isn't. What kept him going? Not optimism. Sanders wasn't some cheerful dreamer. He was desperate. He'd spent 25 years building a business that got destroyed by a highway route he had no control over. He had no backup plan, no savings, no wealthy family. He had a recipe and nothing to lose. 1956. Sanders walks into Pete Harmon's restaurant in Salt Lake City, Utah, does his demonstration, cooks his chicken. Harmon tastes it. Yes, first franchisee. Pete Harmon became the first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise. And here's what made Sanders different from all those failed pitches. He wasn't just selling a recipe. He was offering a complete system. The pressure fryer, pre-packaged spice blend, training on technique, quality standards, even the name, Kentucky Fried Chicken. It sounded authentic, traditional, trustworthy. Harmon's sales exploded. Word spread among restaurant owners. There's this old guy driving around with a chicken recipe, and it actually works. By 1957, Sanders had a handful of franchises. By 1958, dozens. By 1960, 200 locations. And here's where Sanders' age became an advantage instead of a liability. His white suit, white goatee, colonel title. The whole image became the brand. He wasn't just some corporate franchisor. He was Colonel Sanders, the guy who'd been perfecting this recipe for 30 years. The guy who'd cook it himself to make sure you got it right. Young entrepreneurs can sell innovation, but Sanders was selling something else. Trust, experience, authenticity, and it worked. By 1963, 600 restaurants were serving Kentucky Fried Chicken, the largest fast food chicken operation in America. Sanders was 73 years old, and that's when he made a decision that would either prove the doubters right or make him a multimillionaire. He couldn't keep up. He was still traveling. still training franchisees, still quality checking. But 600 locations was too much for one man to manage, even one as obsessively hands-on as Sanders. So in 1964, he made a decision: sell the company to investors, John Y. Brown Jr. and Jack Massey, $2 million. In 1964 money, that's equivalent to approximately $20 million today. Sanders kept his salary as brand ambassador, kept his title, kept traveling and representing the brand. But the empire he'd built in 9 years, from age 65 to 74, was now worth millions. And he kept working until he was 84 years old, died at 90, from bankrupt at 65 to multimillionaire at 74. 9 years. But here's the question nobody asks. Why did Sanders succeed when 1,009 restaurant owners rejected the same opportunity? What did he see that they didn't? And what were they believing that turned out to be completely wrong? The answer isn't about fried chicken, or franchising, or sales skills. It's about a cognitive bias, one that costs more wealth after 50 than most people realize, one that Sanders somehow avoided, and one that Warren Buffett built his entire fortune by understanding. So here's what was really happening. Those 1,009 restaurant owners who said no to Sanders, they weren't stupid. They weren't bad business people. They were making a calculation, an unconscious one, based on a mental shortcut their brains had been trained to use. They looked at Sanders, 65 years old, white hair, selling a chicken recipe out of his car, and their brains ran a quick simulation. Even if this works, how long can he sustain it? 5 years? 10? He'll be 75, 80. He won't be around to support the franchise. It's called temporal discounting bias, combined with what psychologists call ageism bias. But let me explain what that actually means in plain English. Our brains are wired to undervalue future rewards when we think we don't have much time. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. If you're a hunter-gatherer and you think you only have a few seasons left, you don't plant crops. You consume what's available now. In modern times, this bias shows up in a specific way. At 50, 60, 70, we start thinking, I don't have enough time left to build something big, so why invest the effort? But here's the kicker. It's not just old people who fall into this trap. It's everyone around old people. Those restaurant owners looked at Sanders and unconsciously thought, he's too old, not enough time, too risky. They were wrong on every level. Sanders franchised for 19 years, worked until he was 84, died at 90. He had more time than most startups need to reach an exit. But the deeper error was this. They assumed time was the limiting factor, when actually, expertise was the multiplier. Sanders had 25 years of restaurant experience at age 65. He'd already solved every operational problem: food cost management, customer service, quality control, kitchen efficiency. He'd spent 2.5 decades learning lessons that young entrepreneurs would take years to figure out. That expertise didn't disappear when he turned 65. It compounded. The same pattern shows up in Warren Buffett's story. Buffett had $300 million at age 50. Most people would think, that's it, he won. He can retire, preserve capital. But Buffett understood compound interest, and he understood that his real edge wasn't his money. It was his pattern recognition. 5 decades of studying businesses, market cycles, human behavior. At 50, that expertise was just hitting its exponential curve. By 65, Buffett had $12 billion. By 90, over $100 billion. Over 80% of his lifetime wealth came after age 65. Not because he got lucky, because compound expertise plus compound returns finally showed their exponential results. Sanders followed the same curve. 25 years of expertise, 9 years of focused execution. Result: $2 million exit and a global brand that outlived him by decades. But society tells us the opposite story. Retirement at 65. When down, preserve, don't risk. You don't have time. And millions of people believe it. They shift their investments to safety, bonds, low yield, capital preservation. They stop learning new skills because what's the point? They don't start businesses because I'm too old. They surrender their final 20 years of cognitive prime because they've accepted a timeline that was invented in 1935 when life expectancy at 65 was 3 years. Today's 65-year-old has an average of 18 to 20 years left. Healthy years. Sharp years. Sanders proved what those years could build. 9 focused years from 65 to 74. Global empire. The 1,009 people who rejected him. They were protecting themselves from risk, but they were using the wrong risk model. They saw Sanders' age as a liability. He saw it as proof that he'd already done the hardest part, learning the craft. In his own words, Sanders later said, "I made a resolve then that I wasn't going to quit. I was 65 and had 40 years of my life left. 40 years. Not a few years to wind down. 40 years. He was off by half. He got 25 years. But even that was enough. The lesson isn't everyone should start a business at 65. The lesson is this: the belief that you don't have enough time is often the only thing actually stopping you. So what can we learn from this? 3 patterns worth recognizing. First, expertise compounds just like capital. Sanders had 25 years of restaurant experience at 65. That wasn't wasted time. It was preparation. Buffett had 30 years of investing experience at 50. That's when the exponential curve started showing results. If you're 50, 60, 70, you're not starting from zero. You're starting with decades of pattern recognition that younger competitors don't have. Second, the 1,009 rejections weren't a bug. They were a feature. If Sanders had succeeded at restaurant number 1, he might have stopped at 10 franchises. Small regional business. But systematic rejection forced him to develop a systematic process, repeatable training, standardized equipment, pre-packaged slices. That system is what scaled to 600 locations. Sometimes the resistance is what builds the machine. Third, society's age limits are arbitrary. Retirement at 65 was designed in 1935 when life expectancy at 65 was 68. 3 years of retirement. Today's 65-year-old has 18 to 20 years of cognitive prime ahead. That's longer than most startups need to reach profitability. So here are 3 questions worth considering. What expertise have you been compounding for 20 or 30 years that you might be undervaluing? Simply because of your age? Are you in preservation mode financially or mentally? When you actually still have 15 to 25 years of high cognitive function remaining? And if you knew that 9 focused years could change everything, what would you attempt that you're not attempting now? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're math problems. If you're 60 with $300,000 and 20 years left, 8% annual returns give you $1.4 million. If you shift to safe, 3% returns because you think you're too old to take calculated risks, you end with $542,000. Temporal discounting bias just cost you $860,000. Here's what matters for investors in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. You have advantages younger investors don't. Pattern recognition from decades of experience. Reduced ego because you've already made your big mistakes. And clarity that comes from knowing your time is finite. Infinite timelines create procrastination. Finite timelines create focus. Sanders used all 3. And so did Buffett. Remember, this is educational analysis of historical events, not financial advice. Colonel Sanders and Warren Buffett's results are not typical. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Before making any investment or business decisions, always consult with qualified professionals who understand your specific situation. But history is clear on one thing. Your best decades might not be behind you. They might be exactly where you are right now. Next time, we'll examine the opposite scenario. What happens when a brilliant investor does everything right for 30 years, then destroys it all because he can't admit he was wrong? We'll break down Charlie Munger's most painful mistake, a position he held for 3 decades. That cost him hundreds of millions. Because of one simple cognitive bias, even the smartest man in investing couldn't escape. That's next on The Old Investor.